Hello, welcome everybody to another episode of JewishDrinking.com, the show. And with Hanukkah coming up next week, what better time to talk about Hanukkah and drinking than during Hanukkah? But as a preparation, we're talking about this today. And today I have on as a guest, a first-time guest, Rabbi Ben Shefter, who's currently serving as the senior Jewish educator in Ontario, Canada for Guelph and McMaster. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
He's originally from Baltimore, Maryland, and he went to University of Maryland, where as a terrapin, he received a BS in Material Science and Engineering, and then he graduated from my alma mater, Yeshivat Chovei Torah, in 2016. And but before this, before you went to Ontario, you were in Westchester, right? We're doing this during the daytime, so we're not drinking. But Rabbi Shefter here does brew beer. He brings that STEM background in material science and engineering to the brewing sciences. So what do you like to brew, Ben?
I generally prefer like doubles and triples because there is a lot of extra sugars, so that even if you make a mistake, there's a lot to ferment, so that alcohol content is always there. It also has a lot of really interesting flavors, and using like the Bulgarian like sugars has been really interesting and fun to use.
Ooh, very neat. Okay. All right. So we at least discuss some drinking, even if we're not doing any drinking right now. So that'll suffice for us, right? We can be Yotze on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I can bring a beer, but like we could do it while I'm brewing if that helps.
Whoa, JewishDrinking.com has never done that before. Doing a discussion over brewing beer. What?
Live brew session.
Yes. Why not? Why not? Okay. So we're discussing Hanukkah. And, it's funny because I think most people don't necessarily readily associate Hanukkah with drinking. Very similar to Hanukkah is Purim. And that needs, that's like probably the most drinkingest day on the Jewish calendar, closely rivaled by Simchas Torah. But Purim, it's out now, like that's the most drinkingest day of the calendar. Hanukkah, which is usually it's like close sister or cousin, is really people don't associate that with that. And then, of course you have your holidays and you have Kiddush, but we have no Kiddush on Hanukkah aside from just regular Shabbat. So I wanted to introduce it, which is, let's just talk about the halakha. And in Shulhan Arukh and Orach Chaim 670, the second little halachic session, we do get a brief discussion about drinking. And so there is some in Jewish practice.
I do have to say that when you first asked me to do this, my first recollection is there is a big connection between drinking and Hanukkah. Our beer bottled menorahs, when you're in Gavir in Israel, everybody gets the different kegs and different things, and like that's the connection with Hanukkah.
It's funny. The very first time I ever saw a beer bottle menorah was also Israel. I saw someone in year core doing the year program at Bar Ilan was doing it. Do you still do that? Do you still do beer bottle menorahs?
Oh, I never did it to begin with, but other friends did.
Oh, I've been doing it for the last several years. It's been fun. I just, keep adding to the bottles there. You just have to put water most of the way, throw a little olive oil, a little wick thing, and you're good to burn. You don't have to be in Israel to do a beer bottle menorah. That's all I'm saying.
And now with all like Hebrew and all the other like Jewish brewing companies, my company was going to be called Arba because there are 4 main ingredients in beer, and I thought it rounds it out nicely. It sounds eloquent also. So now to the halacha.
Yes.
ריבוי הסעודות שמרבים בהן הם סעודות הרשות. So there is a custom where people will have extra meals on Hanukkah, but all of these are just sort of meals that you're allowed to have. They're not Suda mitzvah. Kiba'um, lemista, ושמחה. Because when Hanukkah was established, it was never established as there wasn't the established nature of mishta, of drinking, and simcha, and happiness, like there is connected to Purim, which mishta v'simcha a lot of times is what leads to all the drinking on Purim.
Yeah.
So that's all the Shulhan Arukh has to say on that.
Which by the way, even though it sounds like, there's no obligatory nature, and the sages didn't establish drinking and rejoicing for Hanukkah, nevertheless, people can, like, it fits with the season of Hanukkah. It's just not, there's no obligatory aspect to it.
Right. The Ramah then adds, "V'yesh omrim," that there are those who say, "Sheyesh kitzat mitzvah ריבוי הסעודות," that there is a little bit of a mitzvah to do it. So it's not just a reshut, that it's not just permission, but that there might be a little bit of like brownie points that you get. משום דבאותן הימים היה חנוכת המזבח, because this was the time when the altar was rededicated. ונוהגין לומר זמירות ושבחות בסעודות שמרבים בהם ואז היו סעודות מצווה. And at these types of places, there's a custom to sing songs of praise to God, and that at these types of meals, there are some who have the custom that this would be considered a seudah of a mitzvah as opposed to just a reshut. So there are those who say that you should eat cheese during Hanukkah. That there is because part of the miracle of Hanukkah came through cheese or dairy products that Yehudit, Judith, fed to our enemy. And that's based on the kolbo and the ran.
Yeah. By the way, can I quickly read the kolbo?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So, v'yesh mefarshim, some explain she'al yidei isha yira lahem hanes hagadol, so that this whole miracle happened through a particular woman, Ushma Yehudis, and Judith was her name. Kemoshe Meforish Ba'agada. Some Agada is out there. It's not really clear which one he's referring to. Bas Haisa Yochanan Kohen Gadol, that somehow she was Yochanan the high priest's daughter. B'Haisa Yifat Toar Ma'od, and she was really hot. Ba'amar HaMelech Yavan, and the Greek king Shtish Kavimo, and he wanted to sleep with her. The Seleucid king wanted to sleep with her. And so she fed him a cheesy dish. And that he would drink, basically like through the cheesy goodness, and then he would that he would be thirsty from it. Then he would drink so much that he'd get drunk and just fall like totally fast asleep. Vayula Cain, and that's what happened. V'tishka v'yerdam v'tikach herbo v'tachka rosho. So then he fell fast asleep. He was totally out, and then she took his sword, and then she was able to remove his head from his body. V'taviehu l'Yerushalayim, and she brought that head to Jerusalem. V'chirot hachayel ki meis gevuram v'yinusu. That once his soldiers, whoever this king was, saw it, they all fled. Then that's why we have this custom of having cheesy dishes on Hanukkah. Now, this is fascinating because for lots of things, the cheesy dish here, at least what the kolbo is mentioning, is in order to make him thirsty so that he would drink wine and get drunk and be totally out. But yet, we're not saying it's the wine is the key part of it. It was the cheese that caused him to drink the wine to get drunk. And, like, why don't you just combine the cheese and the wine? Like, people would have wine and cheese together. That's totally normal. And, like, it wasn't the cheese that got him to sleep. It was the wine.
Right.
But that's the kolbo. That's the kolbo, by the way, that the Ramah is referencing. So there is a wine in that halachic reference.
Correct. Which I actually think there's two really interesting things about this. Number one, this is sort of like the food tradition that eventually leads to latkes. Because the idea was, because it used to be that people would make like cheese pancakes, and they would connect it to this idea of Yehudit from the Ramah, from the kolbo and other places, and that it just became that like cheese was expensive and oil, like olive oil was expensive, so they started using lard, and they needed something to replace the lard. So like in the 1800s, they just switched to potato, and that's how we get to the latke, which is fascinating. That like our food, it's the one food tradition that's like connected to Judaism that's actually linked to a female protagonist. All the other foods are not connected to any particular person, but this one food is, which I think is interesting. And I do think that this idea of focusing on the cheese is that the cheese is what starts the process, as opposed to the wine, which sort of like finishes the process. So it's sort of what is the ikar and the tefel in this, and clearly the rabbis have chosen that one is more important than the other.
Right, and also that, it's almost funny because they're like, wine's normal, but cheese, now that's not something you see every day. That stands out for us in this story.
That is true.
So, obviously also part of that kolbo is what agada is he talking about? Because it's not really clear where he's sourcing it from. Now, look, there is a book of Judith, which comes from the Second Temple period, and it probably somehow ultimately, whatever the kolbo is referencing, goes back to the book of Judith in some shape or form, even though the book of Judith is not mentioned within rabbinic literature, not Mishnah, not Tosefta, no Midrashim, Talmuds, nothing. It's not, we don't see anything about Judith there. So I'm curious, whatever the kolbo is referencing. By the way, I will also mention that Tosfos, just in passing, mentions it on Megillah 4, I think 4a, could be 4b. Tosfos mentions Yehudit with regards to the Hanukkah story, but doesn't say anything about her or anything more about that story. So it's a little murky here, this connection. And did you have anything you want to say about Judith?
I would just add in that the interesting thing is how the modern, basically anyone on the Shulhan Arukh and newer has basically eventually said that Yehudit is the daughter of Yochanan, but if you go back to the book of Judith, it actually specifically says it's in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, clearly not in the same time period. And when you actually look at it, what's fascinating is I did come across the Aruch HaShulchan. On it, actually, on this, on Orach Chaim 670, says about Yehudit, and furthermore, after time had passed, a miracle was performed by Yehudit, who fed the enemy milk, and on this basis, there are some who are meticulous to eat cheese on Hanukkah, even though this did not take place during the time of the story of Hanukkah. So it's interesting to note that he specifically says it didn't happen during Hanukkah, but he does seem to say that it happened after Hanukkah. So it's just interesting that he's the one source I have seen that sort of tries to decouple the two of them from the story, and yet pulls her in the wrong direction. Yeah,
that is good. That's good to see that he decouples it. I like that phrasing, decoupling. By the way, listeners out there, viewers, listeners, next week during Hanukkah, we're going to have on a guest, Karen, I could be pronouncing her name wrong, but Professor Karen Tamber-Rosenau, who will be speaking to us about chapters 12 and 13 in the book of Judith. So we're going to be exploring the role, the very important role of wine in the story. And it's funny because we don't, in the book of Judith, in those chapters 12 and 13, see anything about cheese or cheesy dishes or anything dairy. It's only wine. Whether it's directly from the book of Judith or some sort of medieval different agada, as the kolbo talked about, it is fascinating that it's largely seemingly built off of chapter 4 in Judges, in the book of Judges, where we see Yael killing Sisera, where she does feed him milk, right? And then she takes the tent peg and puts it through his skull. So
I would also
clearly, that seems to be the earliest telling of the story, and then somehow it just gets reworked.
I would say also another interesting thing about the book of Judith, just from looking at it, is it reads very similar to one of the judges from the book of Judges, because especially near the end, it talks a lot about how righteous she was and how everybody was really good and followed God and everything was fine and dandy. And I think that potentially one of the connections from her story to Hanukkah before it got conflated was in the last chapter, it talks about how there were all of these different celebrations about the victory of cutting off his head that were celebrated until this day. And so potentially this story what might have actually occurred around the time that we celebrate Hanukkah, but sort of like over time we kept that tradition, but sort of like lost the story. And yet we sort of like then just took the story and brought it into the Hanukkah story to say that it was connected to the Chashmonaim. And so I just think it's really interesting to think about the conflation of all these different historical events. And especially when Hanukkah very much feels like what happens when you start getting drunk, that all of these different parts of your life get sort of like conflated into one.
It brings me
to all sort of just get like...
It brings me to something that I've heard several people suggesting, and I know I need to do it, and this would be an incredible topic, is drunken Jewish history that we need to make happen for jewishdrinking.com. And, it'd be great. We could ply someone with a bunch of wine or beer, whatever they prefer, and then they could sit down and try to make a connection between the Book of Judith and the halachot we have of cheese, like cheesiness. Like,
yeah.
It'd be a great drunken Jewish history, or even better, drunken halachic history. I mean, that'd be an incredible miniseries.
Mm. Yeah.
I'm looking for
one interesting thing though is if you look at the Shulhan Arukh, that sort of like gets back to this question of where is the wine? Like clearly there's the idea of mitzvah ושמחה, and there was wine connected to this story, and yet it seemed to have been pulled out. That the Biur Halacha actually brings up a very interesting thing of this idea of singing zimiרות and ושבחות, and basically says that it used to be that people would drink a little bit to get happier and bring praise, but it basically says that there's this concern that people won't actually remember and bless God for the miracles, but rather they would play a lot of, they have a thing called here, kartin, which are probably which is mitzvah klafim. So they would have like gambling games and things like that while they were drunk. And because of that, v'harbe here ishu hasfarim hakadoshim al zeh v'shomer nafsho yirchak mizeh. That a lot of holy books have sort of said, distance yourself from doing these types of actions. It seems very similar to like people were getting drunk and then playing dreidel or like Texas dreidel style, and like they don't like the idea of gambling, and a lot of times when they were drinking it would lead to gambling, and so they try and strip alcohol from this entire holiday.
Right. It's also funny, v'hashomer nafsho yirchak mizeh, meaning most people were doing this.
Right. Like the rabbis didn't like it.
Most people are doing it, but if you want to be the few, the proud, the protectors of your souls, then refrain from that. But that's really funny.
Yeah, I just think that sort of, it seems like Hanukkah might have been a more like drunken, festive time that had more like teeth to it, where it wasn't just like you lit Hanukkah candles and you gave gifts and you had latkes and dreidels, but like there was actually something more to it. But because of all these different concerns, we sort of like lost it.
Yeah.
The idea of what like the spiritual, like the neshama of the people were the ones that were challenged on Hanukkah, as opposed to the physical body, which is one of the reasons that they say that we don't have like Suda mitzvah is because we were only challenged spiritually, not physically, like we were on Purim. And right. So since we were challenged spiritually, and maybe alcohol lessens the spiritual side of things.
Is that Kabbalistic or Hasidic? Like, what's the origin of that? I've heard it just like in the ether and people talking about it. But I'm curious to hear the source of it.
It's in the Mishnah Berurah, Vav.
Yeah, this is a big one.
Yeah, Kavum lמשתה ושמחה. Because it says, Ki b'Purim haya hagazera lahashmid v'laharog et hagufot, shu bitul משתה ושמחה. Because our body were the ones that were the gezerah to kill was against the body, and because the body is like negated by mishta and simcha, of drink and happiness, v'lo et hanefashot, but just not the soul. She'afilu himiru datam chas v'shalom lo haya mekabel otam. Because when it came to the Chashmonaim, it was just, there were laws. They said you couldn't practice Judaism, you couldn't necessarily connect, but your body was totally fine.
Yeah.
As quotes the Eliyahu Rabbah.
All right, cool. All right. So it goes back a little ways. It's definitely, it is a nice and tidy explanation differentiating these like sister or cousin celebrations of Purim and Hanukkah, yet they're so different in our celebrations of them.
Correct. Definitely. And I think that you sort of, when you learn any of the sugiyot of Hanukkah, you sort of, it feels like they can't really make up their minds of 100% what the identity is. Because like even in like the famous one of like, what is Hanukkah, you're like, why are they asking that question if it's a holiday that we're supposed to be celebrating? And actually one of the things that I've thought a lot about, which actually could connect to alcohol also in this idea of partying, is the idea of going up every night, of sort of increasing in holiness. When you see the source of it in the Menachot, it actually talks about quality, not quantity. So theoretically, to fill the same halachic idea, you, instead of like going up the number of candles every night, in theory you could go up quality of candles. So like the first night would be like a birthday candle, the second night would be like a Shabbat candle, and like the last night would be like a gold plated like Yankee candle, and that you would have the same number, but it's actually about the quality. And
where did you reference that?
The Ma'alim B'Kodesh, like going up in, is in Chulin. I don't remember exactly where, but it's in connection to the idea of taking the showbreads and putting it onto the shulchan in the Mishkan, in the Beit HaMikdash, that there were like gold shulchanot, that there was silver and then gold and then a gold one. And the idea was that you couldn't go down to a less precious metal because of Ma'alim B'Kodesh Me'im B'Ridin.
Right. And I do want to point something out since you brought it up. I didn't bring it up. You brought it up. This phrase of Ma'alim B'Kodesh Lomar reading. So it appears twice in the Mishnah, and in Menachot and Shkalim, and then it also appears in the Bavli and Menachos, a couple of times in Menachos, Megillah. So one of the fascinating things, and I think people don't really use it the right way, at least in common parlance, maybe just or at least what I've seen on the internet. That could just be the internet. People usually use it Shmalim B'Kedusha, that we're supposed to elevate in holiness, Lomar reading, not to descend in holiness. But that's not the language that Chazal use, that the sages use, the Shmalim B'Kodesh. And there, it's really talking about matters of the Beit HaMikdash. When we say Shmalim B'Kodesh, it's things that are items, particular items associated that are in the Beit HaMikdash.
What I'm saying is that when it's connected to the Beit HaMikdash, it's about like the qualitative difference as opposed to quantitative difference.
That's really cool. I hadn't realized that.
I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, except in the Sugya and Shabbat, which is then connected to numbers, but that could be more because it's connected to the Parei Chag, which go down in number.
I find that people usually say, "Oh, we always ascend in holiness," but I'm like, no. This phrase in rabbinic literature is talking about just matters associated with the temple.
Right. I mean, you can say that having two of the same thing is more valuable also, and more like sanctified than one of the same thing. So that's sort of another way of getting around it. Because in the Sugya Menachot where it talks about the 10 shulchanot that Solomon made in the temple, which is like, why do you need 10 when one was sufficient? And it was like, did they just like rotate every day, like put a challah on each one? And so it does sort of create this interesting picture, which, coming back to this idea of drinking and do we have this connection to Hanukkah or not, of that most of the time when most people I know that don't like alcohol, it's because they drink inferior quality, and that part of Hanukkah is actually about how do you find like high quality things, and is it better to have one shot of like a $30 shot of whiskey versus the $30 bottle of whiskey, and that part of like celebrating the victory and sort of I think that in the like darkness of Hanukkah, the idea of treating yourself to something nice for your soul, like a higher quality thing as opposed to a lesser quality thing, might be one of the drinking messages of Hanukkah.
That is a great drasha for Jewish drinking. That's a great drasha.
And that's how you know you went to rabbinical school, is how you can make a drush out of anything. There was one other thing that sort of came up in the interest of this was there, which I don't know if you wanted to, we can discuss it now or just wait till another time, is that there is the sugya in Shabbat of like, if you only have enough money for Shabbat candles or Hanukkah candles, which one do you go with? And then the second part is, if you only have enough money for Hanukkah candles or Kiddush, which one do you go with? And I had postulated, which I asked a couple of rabbis around, that hypothetically, if you could get alcohol that would burn nicely, could you then just, if you only have enough for one, just buy one bottle of like high, you need like 150 proof whatever, but theoretically you could buy something that could be used both for Hanukkah lighting and for Kiddush, provided that it's a nice flame that will last and you don't have to worry about it potentially going out. And so like the like halachic conundrum could be solved by getting a high proof alcohol.
I mean, wine's probably going to be way cheaper than whatever high proof alcohol you'd get, right?
Well, doing my my scientific research, you need at least, I think it's like 150 proof for there to be enough alcohol in it to sustain a flame. So you need something that both burn and it's palatable. So like Bacardi 151 is sort of like the line where you can maybe make it work.
Right. But at that point, you probably you can afford wine at that point.
I mean, like, what was it called? I think it was called American Spirit when I was in Israel for the year. There was something that was like 98% alcohol. And like, it was very inexpensive.
Really?
Or like Everclear, like people I work with university students all the time. So they're looking for what is the most bang for your buck when it comes to drinking. And if they can have something that's very high proof and it's pretty cheap, then there is a way that you could find something that's high proof that's actually cheaper than wine and Hanukkah candles.
We'll just parenthetically say, when it comes to what you mentioned in Shabbat 23b, about all these questions that Rava has about like what takes precedence near Hanukkah, Kiddush, all these things. I find it really fascinating also that this is the only point in I should say that Pirsume Nisa is something that is like a specialty of Rava's. So if you allowed me to get nerdy for a moment. So the first time the phrase Pirsume Nisa is mentioned in the Talmud is brought up by Achi, who is a Tana at Rabbi Chia's school, and that's on Brachot 14a. But really after that, it's Rava. Like Rava is the main person who discusses Pirsume Nisa. So he uses it with regards to the reading of Megillah on Megillah 3b. He's the only person in the Talmud who uses it in reference to Hanukkah. We see that in Shabbat 23b. And we also, someone in his generation asked whether they make mention of Hanukkah in the grace in Berchan HaMazon, the grace after meals, and he responds to them quoting Rav Sechora, who quotes Rav Huna on Shabbat 24a. And then it's used one other time in the Bavli in the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, by one of the Stam in Pesachim 112b. So it's mainly associated with Rava, which is not really surprising that we would find Rava talking about that here. But it's also interesting that I will say that there's no clear reason given in the Babylonian Talmud as to why we light Hanukkah lights, right? And if you look at the Tannaitic stuff, we have who lights them, what the lighting is, where you light it, when you light it, how you light it. There's just no why provided. It's like this glaring lacuna of, wait a second, but like, what's the whole basis for it? And even in Shabbat 21b, where we get the My Hanukkah Brisa, you have this text that's like leading you to like this obvious conclusion that you're going to light, and it says, oh no, we just do Hallel and Hodah. Wait a second, but like I mean, you already mentioned the oil, the Pach Shemen, like that would be the obvious point in time to mention lighting candles, but nope, we're not going to. We don't really know why. I mean, at least the Gemara leaves us totally, in the dark as to why we're lighting Hanukkah candles. But this sort of like halachic value that Rava espouses of Pirsu Nisa is interesting. It's not necessarily why we light Hanukkah candles. He's just asserting it as a halachic value.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I feel like Hanukkah, this like mishmash of ideas and holidays and traditions from all over the place that have sort of like smushed into one container that we call Hanukkah, and it has so many like different colors and textures and notes and different things, and yet it really is this hodgepodge. It's not a seamless holiday like all the other ones.
Yeah. So in some, Hanukkah is there's no obligation to drink, but it's totally fine to do so.
Mm-hmm. Except just don't do it while you're playing cards, while you're gambling.
No. He didn't say that. He said people do this. People do this. Just the one who wants to guard their soul, they should stay away from it.
Okay.
But everybody else, they're going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
They're going to play their Texas dreidel or whatever.
Yeah. Great.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rabbi Shefter. This was great having you on to talk halacha about Hanukkah and drinking. And I hope you have a Hanukkah Sameach.
Thank you. You too.